Excellent.
I think so. Now it's working.
Yeah. Good.
Can you check that it sound now again when you start to speak that there's
It goes.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Does it move forward? Not really.
Okay, but maybe fine.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
no, it
just go to
not-
the first
it
slide.
does not move here.
Yeah. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Ah,
Okay,
it
now.
does. Okay, I'll do it.
Okay, you can do it. Okay, thank you so much. There seems to be always some technical problems.
Yeah.
But anyhow, it's nice to be talking here, especially in live situation. It's been a long time since I've been speaking in the live seminar. Too many situations where there's only talking heads in the Zoom or in the Teams meeting. So this is really nice change and returning to somewhat new situation after the COVID situation. But thank you. I'm Tomi Halonen from Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture. And I work there in the Department for Higher Education and Science, and I've been one of the persons coordinating our responses to Ukraine in our ministry or in our department related to higher education and science. Of course, on national level, first, Finland stands with Ukraine, and we have condemned Russia's invasion to Ukraine and especially aim to help Ukraine and Ukrainians. We all know, of course, that there are a lot of people who have fled Ukraine, and we have also quite a lot of people in Finland, and also among them are higher education students, are researchers, and people that are affiliated with the higher education and research sector. So I was going to talk about a little bit about basically two issues that first of what ministry have done so far, and then about some thoughts about the future, what will come in coming times. Yeah, but as Sirke said, early March, Minister Kurvinen made the decision regarding the cooperation with the Russia and Belarus. And as said, we have also been freezing the cooperation with Russian partner organizations in higher education and science. And as actually Kari said, we have been using the same kind of terminology that exactly freezing the cooperation. That has been the point, that it's not idea completely terminated, but to freeze in the current situation and leave kind of the door open for the future if the situation changes. Basic principle, as said, was that and recommendation is that the new projects should be initiated, and this kind of existing cooperation should be suspended in this current situation. And of course, this applies also to national cooperation between the authorities, and that's the basic idea behind this. And when I was listening to earlier speakers and think about it, the choices and the situation that this kind of choices behind that decision, it's a little bit hard to think of other kind of decision that could be made, because we cannot really know at the situation that on the organizational level whether the organizations are silent. And as said, quite many organizations actually have been signing this kind of petition to support the war and being pro the war in Russia. So it's really something that needs to be taken into account. Then it's also really important to take note that our recommendation really applies to organizational cooperation in this. People have direct contacts over the border, and this is something that can well continue. I think in many ways this is something that can really, this kind of discussion between peoples can support the development of the civil society. So it's also important to have that kind of contacts to people that are still into contact with over the border from the Russian partners. Please go to the next slide. Thank you. Actually, this decision goes very well along with the decision done in many international organizations. And firstly and foremostly, of course, Finland is part of the European Union, and many of these actions have been along the same lines than actually our partners in European Union and also partner countries. European Union has imposed many sanctions and restrictions in this situation, and these restrictions actually apply quite a lot to our cooperation in the field of higher education and science also. For example, financial resources must not be available to those subject to sanctions. That's something that personal sanctions are actually quite broad sanctions and apply to quite a lot of people in those lists. So if there are people on that kind of list, that's quite clear. That comes from the EU regulations also. And this kind of restrictions on fund transfers, of course, affect quite a lot of the possibilities to operate between the partners and between the Russian partners anyhow. Also, we all know that there are quite many specific fields that where is even more restrictive, like this kind of oil industry or space industry or this kind of dual use goods, and that kind of research on that kind of fields where you need to be especially careful in that kind of discussion, not to provide any technical assistance related, for example, to military uses or military end uses. There are this kind of fields also. And also, of course, we are affected, and we are not only affected, it's a wrong word, but because we have been part of the discussions making those decisions in the European Union. But there is Commission has decided to freeze cooperation with the framework programs, EU training and research programs where with the partners. So that's part of also in this situation. And also, and of course, the European Union is not the only one. We have been discussing about this situation in basically every single international organization we as a country are part of. OECD would be, for example, good example where we have which of the organization which have frozen cooperation with Russia, and actually they were somewhat active also in that cooperation. They were not members, but they were part of the, for example, PISA studies and this kind of programs. So whether they were participating at that kind of programs, and they have been excluded from that kind of cooperation. And it's also worth, of course, to note that this is not only in relation to international organization or the European Commission. It's these decisions are very much in line with our most relevant partner countries. For example, Nordic countries in European Union, but also broadly in the Western world. So next slide, please. So basic principle actually in our recommendation is, of course, that is to support Ukraine, which is target of the unlawful attack and war. And aim, it's really important to remember that aim is not really to target the Russian students and researchers, especially studying here in Finland. That's something that needs to be reminded in this kind of discussion, because our basic principle in Finnish legislation is that we do not discriminate anyone based on anyone's citizenship. And especially in many discussions in which ministry had been having in this situation, but also Finnish ministers and authorities have really emphasized that any kind of discrimination based on the citizenship is something that must not happen and must not be tolerated in this kind of situation. And of course, no one needs to leave country, needs to leave Finland due to the war in Ukraine, regardless of their origin. But what have been our actions lately? It has been, of course, quite broadly focused on the supporting to students coming from Ukraine and this kind of situation. And we have actually just opened a call for grant application, which is aimed to fund shorter studies, for example, like open university education, separate studies to those who are in the need of temporary protection. This is actually something that we cannot really not do based on the citizenship, but it's based on that kind of temporary protection status. So that's one clear distinction also in this situation. This funding can also be granted for developing increasing provision in functional bilingual and English-speaking education leading to a degree. So it's in that sense it's a little bit broader than not only for those who need temporary protection. An idea is, of course, to develop and expand more permanently available this kind of studies, provision of foreign language education, and also preparatory education for immigrants, those residing in Finland is very important part of this action there. And this is kind of continuing from the April when we published this kind of action plan related to support Ukrainian higher education students and researchers. There were already some parts and some mentions of the non-degree funding, and now we opened the application for that. But there is also some other things that we have been discussing with the other organizations and jointly basically been opening, for example, like the National Agency of Education's EduFit Fellowship for doctoral students from Ukraine, and development of different guidance and steering issues, establishing this kind of joint web pages with the national agency within our ministry, and possibilities for students and personnel. So, and also building this kind of frequently asked questions in our webpage, where you can find information, for example, on the effect of the sanctions and effect of this kind of cooperation and how it affects. So we have been all the time basically updating this kind of information to our webpage. And of course, we are really pleased to see that many higher education institutions have actually established possibilities for Ukrainian students and personnel on their own initiative. In many situations, institutions themselves can move really much faster forward than the ministry typically manages to do so. So institutions actually did very many things very quickly and have been doing this kind of programs all the time, basically. So, and all higher education institutions offer enhanced support for Ukrainians, which is really, really important. And this also, the supporting immigrants in higher education generally has been quite important part in this issue. And many have, of course, offered different posts to research personnel also fleeing from Ukraine, so it's important also. One thing actually that's very, very timely right now, that actually tomorrow will be published second supplementary budget proposal. It will be given tomorrow to Parliament, and there will be some additional measures for education, guidance and support for immigrants. We, for example, mentioned already on the April program that we are trying to establish this kind of mobility for researchers issue this in this regard. I cannot really state right now the exact details. I don't know them at at the moment, but you can all read it tomorrow when it's published in more detail how it will be how it will be given to Parliament in the end. So you can have more information that very soon actually. But then a few words about the future. It's really well-known fact that it's really hard to make any kind of predictions, and especially about the future. This situation is most definitely this kind of situation that's really, really difficult to predict. But I think the bottom line in a way is that any significant change is needed before any development on the field of higher education science really can happen, and in this case, so there must be some kind of as long as this unlawful attack and occupation continues in Ukraine, it's really difficult to see that kind of any real changes and possibilities for reviving the cooperation in the field of higher education and research in that sense, and in the organizational level. And as I already mentioned in this seminar also, it's even after, if that kind of situation happens, it still needs quite a long discussion before this kind of situation can happen, because we don't know really the situation, what it will be, and on what kind of revival is possible in that point. Of course, it's really important to know that we will go alongside our partners, for example, in the European Union cooperation in this discussion. So it's also really, really tied to that discussion also. And of course, we take a note of the partner countries also and discuss with the partner countries also if there is a change in the situation. But as I said, the bottom line, I think that there needs to be some kind of real solution, real lasting solution before the situation would really be changed, and this kind of cooperation would be revived. Anyhow, when we think about the situation, if there is improvement in the situation, and of course at this point it's really big if, and nobody knows when something like that might happen, but we are working in the field, this kind of people-to-people related field, which have been in many kind of beginning of cooperation, reviving of cooperation in the history, quite typically the fields where the cooperation have been first fields where the cooperation have been actually happening after some crisis or when building a new cooperation. Typically, it's education is one of those fields. There are some fields of research that might be something like that. Of course, cultural fields and these kind of fields are something that are quite typical when if something happens in those can be the first fields where something happens. But we'll see. It really depends on the situation. And of course, it's all been raised, I think, raised up already by all the previous speakers, that academic freedom is really the question in Russia right now. There has been quite dramatic reductions in, well, it's been happening a long time, but lately especially there have been really dramatic reduction in the academic freedom situation. And for example, there are very good examples of how there's been a complete rewriting of the history. You could say that it's kind of environment where it would be, you had to be, if you would have possibilities to have cooperation there, you need to be quite selective, and you need really to look clearly whether you can keep the quality. And of course, when we are talking about research and higher education, quality is one of the things that we have been always very interested and need to really take account of. So that's something that remains to be seen how it develops, but still it needs to be taken into account in the future also. But one of the things I wanted to raise up, that it's really important to remember that we need also to prepare ourselves for the rebuilding phase after this crisis. It's really important. For example, when President Zelensky addressed our parliament, he welcomed us, our experts, our organizations, to be part of the process of rebuilding Ukraine's educational sector and join the efforts of modernization of education in Ukraine. And we will have really many good experts, very good expertise to help Ukrainians in this situation. So, and this has also been vision of our Ukrainian colleagues in many international discussions. So that's something that we should really think about it and prepare ourselves for the future. And this is something also that the European Union has been discussing quite a lot that they will have many kind of support possibilities also for the Ukrainians in the future, and that's something that we would really want to be part of it when the situation comes. But can you please move to the next slide? I just added a couple of useful links, and I hope these materials can be shared to people after the seminar. You can look about those links. This is our webpage where we have these kind of frequently asked questions. Then there are some other web pages, for example, call for the grant if you have that kind of education possibilities that you are interested in, that kind of call in your higher education institution. And then some other links, for example, to the government's link to Ukraine page, and also from the link that Foreign Ministry has there, you can find more information about the sanctions and these kind of restrictions in that cooperation. So you can freely use those links, and all those pages have also many other links you can lead to that. But thank you.
Thank you very much.